Hey, what it do, everyday people, man? It's your boy PJ. We back with another lit live video. Shout out to my everyday people who rockle with me. Shout out to the everyday people who in the live every day. Okay. I'm gonna just let y'all know I appreciate y'all. I appreciate y'all always pulling up, showing love to your boy. Okay. We got another lit live video. Shout out to China. Shout out to Marco. Shout out to the mods. When the mods get in the chat, shout out to them. Make sure y'all let them know y'all say hello. Because they be in here working faithfully. You know, they keep it lit, dog. We just like lit content. You know what I'm saying? Shout out to Phoenix, Nancy, Melissa's in the building. Shout out to the mods. Like I said, man, we got a good video today. Alright, I hope y'all enjoyed those videos earlier today, that I recorded yesterday. And the videos I recorded today that we're going to be playing tomorrow. And then we're going live again tomorrow. What it do, T66? T66 is going to be in the bushes, okay? So, let's get into it. Without further ado, man, y'all hit that like button and show your boy some love. We come in here for a good time, not a long time, okay? At least for an hour.
I fell in love with my psychiatrist, and he knew that, and he kept me for years as a patient until I was brave enough to leave him. I want to talk about it. Usually on this app, and I have a question, I have a bunch of videos that pop up, and I searched in love with my psychiatrist and nothing happened. So I would really like to discuss what happens when we fall in love with our mental health professionals, and most importantly, the fact that there are so many people, especially men, that are emotionally dead inside, that feel called to going into psychiatry and therapy so they don't have to feel their feelings, but they can feed off of the vulnerability of their mostly female patients. What do you?
Well, let's get everyday people's thoughts. Okay, this is where we're gonna start this off at. What do you think? Anybody's idea why men are such vile individuals that they will become a psychiatrist so they can prey on their patients and, you know, do all this stuff with their patient and love on them forever and not let them date anyone else and do all this narcissistic stuff to them? Like, do we have anybody who has this problem? Anyone care to elaborate? No? Okay. I didn't think so. You know, let's get into it though.
I just got done with a run at the gym. I fell in love with my psychiatrist, and he knew, and he kept me until I had the strength to leave after 4 years. Here it is, part 1. So I decided to go back on ADHD meds after many years of being off of them. I was on them in my early 20s to help me get through college, and then I went off of them because they just weren't, like, the side effects were too much over the benefits. But then in my late 20s, I read this book, Taking Charge of Adult ADHD, and it absolutely changed my life. For my fellow ADHDers, there's so many
shout out to everybody on
things
Twitch
in here. And the biggest thing that I took away was that it's very important for ADHDers to be on meds. So I decided to make an appointment with a psychiatrist. I just Googled psychiatry in the city that I lived in, and I went with the first one that came up, and I got an appointment within a month. And then I booked a 90-minute intake, and I show up to the intake, and this man is my age, and I can't help but notice that he's pretty attractive, this psychiatrist. I fell in love with my psychiatrist. And he kept me anyway, part 2. So in this intake, you know, I kind of clocked that he was attractive, and when I tell you that I've had a lot of couch time in my life, a lot of therapy, you know, I just went right into it. I trusted him enough, of course, why wouldn't I, to tell him about my childhood trauma, my daddy issues, if you will, what I had went through, all of the relationship trauma that I had. I was 6 months sober at this time, but like all of the drinking and substance use I used to do. And he just listened and nodded. And that's the thing about psychiatrists, is that they're good at pretending to listen. They can appear connected, but that doesn't mean that they're always connected. So I just felt really seen. And I also told him, I was like, look, I don't want to be on stimulant meds. So he listened to me and he put me on the non-stimulant ADHD med at the lowest dose just to figure out if it was going to work for me. I fell in love with my psychiatrist and he kept me. I was in love with my psychiatrist and he kept me anyway, part 3. So I hadn't ever seen a psychiatrist before. When I was on meds in my early, I only got meds from my primary care physician. So I didn't understand how psychiatry works. So because he was figuring out my med dose, I saw him every month and he just made me feel like I was his friend. He was really, really funny and cracked jokes and told me he was impressed with my running that I would do. And yeah, so of course I loved the attention that I got from him. And it was in my 3rd session with him, because at this point we were all on Zoom, that I asked him, I said, hey, do you mind if I call you by your first name? And he's Pakistani, so I said his first name wrong. And he said, well, it's pronounced this, but yes, of course you can. And he seemed so smug and happy with himself. And I know that that is because that was his first sign that him pretending like we're friends was working. And to be fair to me, I had only ever been to therapy before. I didn't realize that, it's important to call your doctor last name. I mean, I did know that. I did it with all my other doctors, but it just showed that the boundaries were blurring, and he liked that. So from then on, from my 3rd session on, I started calling him his first name. And then he just started turning up the volume on us being friendly. And he would ask me, for the first 6 sessions, he asked me, after the meds, he said, how's your bowels, bladder, and appetite? And I would say they're all normal. And then he would ask me any thoughts of harm. And apparently that's pretty common for psychiatry to ask those questions. And then on our 6th session, when things were really, the chemistry was starting to be there before, like I didn't realize it. I was like, oh, this man is just friendly. And he said, I have to ask this because it's a special interest of mine, but is there any thoughts of harm? Like I was special to him. And I said, no thoughts of harm. And he didn't ever ask me a clinical question again. He stopped asking me about my bladder, bowels, and appetite, and he stopped asking me about thoughts of harm. So to me, I would just show up and he was like a therapy appointment every month. I was in love with my psychiatrist and he kept. So I was seeing him every month and just gaining more and more respect for him because he would just tell me these little things about his successes and all of the cool things that he was doing in his life. And it made me fall for him, honestly. And he was really good at listening. And I mean, he's a Pisces, right? So of course he's going to be there and be able to go deep with my feelings, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't extracting from them. Anyway, so I would beg him to let me see him every week. Beg him, because my therapist at the time, he was fine. He wasn't a predator, but he was fine. He just wasn't doing very much for me. And so that therapist retired and I got a new therapist. And this new therapist, who is a 75-year-old woman with a PhD, she was pretty helpful. So I stopped asking my psychiatrist, begging, honestly, to be my therapist and let me see him more, right? Which also should have been a red flag. But then I started focusing on this therapist. However, I would tell the therapist how obsessed I was with my psychiatrist, and she didn't do anything about it. She just was interested. She also loved stories about my dating life, and yeah, she also was getting supply from me in her own way, but that's for another part. So yes, so I got a new therapist who actually helped me. She taught me CBT, EFT, all of these different modalities. And so I went back to just being okay with seeing Irfan once a month, while he was giving me these little breadcrumbs of making me feel special, telling me about his professional achievements, telling me about how he's getting international recognition. And it worked. I was really impressed.
Well, I'ma just butt in here for a quick second. But you was kind of leading your therapist on, and then you saying he was trying to get close to you, but you allowed it, and he was good at getting close to you because he's a listener. So all I gotta do is listen to the woman that I like, and then she'll fall for me. I ain't gotta really say nothing. I just let her talk. And the longer we let her talk, the longer she telling on herself. Girl, it was you. But we're gonna get to it, I guess. We're gonna get to it at some point.
He was fine. I got a new therapist. I stopped begging my psychiatrist to see me weekly. And that is when the intermittent started. Some sessions he'd be warm and kind and wonderful and let me in on little parts of his life and like be vulnerable with me or pretend. Other sessions, he would be cold and clinical and detached. And you know what that did? It made me work harder in our next sessions. It did. And it started the addiction that I had to him. 100%. And he knew exactly what he was doing. This man gives lectures on trauma and attachment theory. He used his psychiatric training to manipulate me and get me hooked. And guess what? It worked. In January of 2024, I was hit by a car turning left as I was going through a green light. And it was the night before my next appointment with my psychiatrist. So I was like, okay, I'll still be able to go to my appointment on Zoom. I'm okay. But I did make an appointment with an urgent care the next day just to get checked out. I had bruising on my abdomen and a perforated eardrum. And the provider at the urgent care said, I do not feel comfortable treating you. You need to seek emergency care now. You may be internally bleeding. But it was 11 o'clock in the morning and my appointment with my psychiatrist was at 2. So I decided that I was going to wait so I could see my psychiatrist and not have to reschedule because I was looking forward to my appointment with him so much. I look back at that time and I'm just like, oh my God, I put my own life under seeing him. I was fully addicted to him at this point. And you know what happened is that I showed up and I told him that I may be internally bleeding and he didn't stop the appointment. He didn't say, you need to take care of yourself. Go get emergency care now. He let me continue and just tell him about how much I loved him and how grateful I was for him. Because that was really what most of our appointments were, is me just like pouring myself out because he was so good at the intermittent reinforcement. Yeah, I got some warmth from him that appointment. So that was January 2023. And I also told my therapist about this. She said nothing.
Wait, what kind of warmth did she get? Like, did she get a little bit of wetness down there? Because she's feeling this man and she's getting turned on by this man sexually, and this is not right. But this is all, I believe this is all her internally putting this out there. And he never touches her. He never says he likes her. At this point right now, she has not said that he has told her he likes her. But I bet you she's gonna put herself out there because she's falling in love, and he's gonna hit. I mean, he's a man. What do you expect? No, let's not be stupid. No matter how ugly, we hitting everything. You throw that pussy, we hitting it out the park. Next video.
After I risked my life to see him, that's when he really started turning up the intimacy in our appointments. However, he was really smart. The professional lines like the back of his hand. So he would comment on my appearance, but not compliment my appearance. So I would come on screen and he would say, "Oh, you curled your hair." Or I would come on screen and he would say, "Oh, you're wearing glasses." And of course I felt seen and excited that he was noticing these things about me. I didn't realize at this time that he had feelings for me too. I thought I was holding them all by myself. So I was so excited when he noticed my glasses that I ran and showed him my other pair, and he said, "I prefer turtle shell glasses." So even though I usually wear contacts, I'm wearing these turtle shell glasses in these videos because just in case he sees them ever, he'll see me in his favorite glasses. He did tell me he likes the turtle shell. Anyway, it was just inappropriate things like that, little teeny things that he let me in. And all this time, my best friend is an emergency medicine physician. And she told me, she said, "Kendra, one of these days, your psychiatrist," she would use his name, "is going to say, 'I can't be your doctor anymore. I want to be with you. I want to be with you so bad. I can't be your doctor. I'll see you in 2 years.'" So my best friend, who's a doctor, she picks up on stuff like that. So even she knew that our relationship was crossing boundaries and getting weird, but that became my dream, was for my psychiatrist, I almost use his name, to do that. And I told him about Brianna saying that, my best friend, who's the emergency medical doc. I told him that she would tell me that, and he just would be silent. He didn't disagree, but he didn't agree, and that was weaponized neutrality was his favorite game to play, right? He didn't disagree with Brianna telling me that my psychiatrist had feelings for me, but he also didn't say that's inappropriate, let's change the subject. It was also around this time that I asked my psychiatrist if he had diagnosed me with anything other than ADHD when I had my initial diagnosis. And he said, "Yeah, I did." I said, "Oh, what did you diagnose me with?" And he said, "Well, you had a lot of traumatic things happen to you in childhood because of your dad, and so I diagnosed you with other trauma and stressor related disorder." And that was the first little ping that I got of that was weird. Why would he keep that from me? I asked why wouldn't he tell me that? That seems important. He didn't tell me because he was using that information to manipulate me. He knew I had trauma and stressor disorder, and instead of helping me heal from it and telling me about it, he used it against me. After I risked my life to see him, that's when he really started. January 2023, at this point I was full-blown obsessed with my psychiatrist, and my therapist wasn't helping me, my psychiatrist helping me, he was feeding it. And then I got a boyfriend, and at first my psychiatrist wasn't really that keen, but then my psychiatrist realized that my boyfriend was a lot like my psychiatrist. And then I started talking to my psychiatrist about my sex life, about tracking my cycle, using the fertility awareness method. And my psychiatrist loved it. He didn't never say, "This isn't inappropriate to your care, let's pivot." Oh, he just let me talk and talk and talk about my sex life. And I didn't get too deep, but about a year and a half in, and I would send my psychiatrist these emails just about how much I liked him and how I was so grateful for him, and put in a bunch of heart emojis. And this is really when he should have transferred my care, but he waited. He liked what I gave him too much. And so even though my boyfriend did not meet my needs, my psychiatrist and my therapist both were like, you have to stay with him. There's nothing wrong with him not meeting your needs. I'm like, okay. And my psychiatrist was like, he's perfect. Don't get wrong with him. And what was perfect about him was he wasn't meeting my needs. So I was still coming to my psychiatrist looking for emotional validation, which he would drip to me slowly. So my therapist, who I didn't know at this time had bad boundaries, but she did, I went to her because my boyfriend and I, after more than a year together, we started having issues in the bedroom. And so I went to my therapist and she asked me, what does your psychiatrist think about this? And I said, I don't know. I haven't talked to my psychiatrist about this stuff because I have a crush on my psychiatrist and I don't want to tell him this intimate of stuff. And she said, well, you should tell him because I want a male's perspective. So at my next appointment with my psychiatrist, I told him, I said, today we're going to talk about my intimate life. And he said, oh. I said, yes. My psychologist, my therapist, asked what your opinion on it was. And I told her that I don't talk to you about this intimate stuff because I have a crush on you. And he looked down and smiled so big in that moment. He smiled so big. And I loved it. It's so gross thinking about it. And then I proceeded to give him 30 minutes of non-stop content about my intimate life with my boyfriend. And I actually recorded the whole thing because I was so excited about it. But now it makes me sick. I can't even listen to the recording. I've tried to start, but it's gross. Any ethical psychiatrist would have stopped me and said, Kendra, let's talk about your meds. Let's talk about your care. At this point, my meds were stable. And I was still seeing him every month. Yeah, that was a rough time. And it was pretty much his Christmas morning, the almost 2.5 years of grooming me to get me to talk about sexual things with him worked. And he got 30 minutes of nonstop content to use.
All right, I told y'all she was going to be the first to put it out there that what she did, regardless of what he did, yes, she took the bait. I don't know. I've never been manipulated before. Actually, I have. But not to where I'm like, oh, nah, she tricked me. I'm like, nah, you pulled a fast one on me. But you know what? That was my fault. I'm not gonna blame you. I'm not gonna blame you for what you did. I'm gonna blame me for falling for you and thinking I could trust you. See, that's the problem is she trusted this person. And whether she's right or wrong, she trusted this person. And he got her. But regardless, he let her take the first step. It may be unethical, but as long as she put her feelings out there for him and she started the conversation, she started touching him, she started telling him her intimate life, now it's all on her. It ain't really him. So she probably can't sue him for this. She probably can't get him disbarred or anything, whatever you call it.
January 2023, at this point, I was full-blown obsessed with my psychiatrist. And my therapist wasn't helping me. My psychiatrist wasn't helping me. He was feeding it. And then I got a boyfriend. And at first, my psychiatrist wasn't really that keen. But then my psychiatrist realized that my boyfriend was a lot like my psychiatrist. And then I started talking to my psychiatrist about my sex life, about tracking my cycle, using the fertility awareness method. And my psychiatrist loved it. He didn't never say, this isn't inappropriate to your care, let's pivot. Oh, he just let me talk and talk and talk about my sex life. And I didn't get too deep, but about a year and a half in, and I would send my psychiatrist these emails just about how much I liked him and how I was so grateful for him, and put in a bunch of heart emojis. And this is really when he should have transferred my care, but he waited. He liked what I gave him too much. And so even though my boyfriend did not meet my needs, my psychiatrist and my therapist both were like, you have to stay with him. There's nothing wrong with him not meeting your needs. I'm like, okay. And my psychiatrist was like, he's perfect, don't get wrong with him. And what was perfect about him was he wasn't meeting my needs. So I was still coming to my psychiatrist looking for emotional validation, which he would drip to me slowly. So my therapist, who I didn't know at this time had bad boundaries, but she did. I went to her because my boyfriend and I, after more than a year together, we started having issues in the bedroom. And so I went to my therapist and she asked me, what does your psychiatrist think about this? And I said, I don't know. I haven't talked to my psychiatrist about this stuff because I have a crush on my psychiatrist. I need to address 3 things. 1, people are asking me what my mental health diagnosis is. I do not have BPD. I have ADHD, and I was experiencing extreme limerence with my psychiatrist. Limerence is a normal thing to happen to anyone who is experiencing hot and cold behavior from someone. And it happens more often in people with ADHD because we have dopamine dysregulation and rejection sensitive dysphoria. And guess what? My psychiatrist knew that and used it to his advantage. 2, I accidentally said my psychiatrist's first name in one of my videos. If you clocked it, good for you. I do not owe him anonymity. However, this is not about doxing my psychiatrist. This is about me sharing my story so other people can view predatory behavior in people in power. Okay? If anyone doxes my psychiatrist with his last name or city that he works in or clinic that he works in, your comment will be immediately deleted and you will be blocked. This is about protecting other victims, not doxing my psychiatrist. If you do some investigative work and you want to DM me about it, I'm open to that, okay? 3, I need to take a moment. Moment taken. It is so incredibly disturbing to me, the amount of people that are predator protectors in my comments, that are victim blaming me, especially the mental health practitioners in my comments using therapy speak to say that this situation that I was in was my fault or that I was delusional.
Oh, she big mad.
Check yourself. You're giving me more ammunition to share my story because it just goes to show how absolutely messed up the mental health industry is and how protected people who do this kind of sick psychological manipulation are. So I will continue with my story tomorrow. I will see you all then.
Hey, if I work with this lady, I'm going to HR tomorrow. Get this. Hey, y'all need to check her bag when she come in here. If she got a pistol, I put my desk near the nearest emergency exit. Because if this crazy come to work and flip out on y'all, I'm be there to. I knew she was crazy. I'm gonna be talking to the news. I just knew it was her from I seen her TikTok videos and that one where she was wearing her hat backwards and she was going off on the comment section. I knew from that day forward. I put my desk near the nearest emergency exit because I knew that bitch was coming in with a gun. That may be funny, but it ain't funny.
Welcome back to another installment of I Was in Love with My Psychiatrist and He Kept Me Anyway, Part 8. You all did some nasty work last night, and I comments. People started posting my psychiatrist's first and last name, his picture in the comments. That was a jump scare. So, yeah, a few bad actors who wanted to be super sleuths got the privilege of commenting, mostly hate, let's be real, taken away for everyone. So at this point in the story, there are two main players. My psychiatrist, who's my age, who crossed major ethical boundaries, and my therapist, who is a 75-year-old woman with a PhD. Neither of these people, at this point in the story, I knew were crossing boundaries. I thought that everything was hunky-dory and that I was just in love with my psychiatrist and it was totally normal. Little did I know he was manufacturing everything so I could fall in love with him. Because it was on him to set the professional boundary and not let attention build. So days after my psychiatrist's Christmas morning appointment from a few videos back where he got a crush confession from me and then 30 minutes of non-stop intimate content that he did not stop me, my boyfriend and I broke up days later. So then I started dating this other guy. And this other guy, this new guy, was a therapist. And I was like, oh, great. Someone who will be able to emotionally meet my needs. Yeah, I'm not going to date another therapist again. So this therapist and I, we went for coffee. It was nice. Our second date was
just don't date your therapist.
And on this hike, this therapist starts telling me about how he has a crush on one of his clients. And I thought to myself, okay, this is strange, but go ahead. Like, we're on a date, dude. Why are you telling me about a crush on one of your clients? But go off, King. So then he was saying, yeah, she's so attractive. And I think she likes me too. I go and visit her at work and her coworkers say, oh, so-and-so talks about you all the time. And I was like, okay, where does she work? And he said, well, I shouldn't tell you that because I really shouldn't. So then he continues and he said, yeah, she wears these red lacy panties and short skirts. And I know she wears them for me. And like alarm bells were going off in my head. Mind you, I had no idea that my psychiatrist had similar feelings towards me at this point. But I just thought, wow, this man is borderline predatory. And he said, yeah, and you know, she just is so attractive that I have to smash mermate before every session because I just have to get that energy out of me. And I was like, okay. And yeah, he just felt compelled to tell me, and I did not understand why. Now I do. So he told me about how he's a predator, right? Another predator in the mental health industry. Shocker. So then at my next appointment with my psychiatrist, keep in mind, it had been 6 weeks of nonstop fun for this man. He got to use my crush confession and 30 minutes of content, for whatever he wanted to use it for, right? And if my psychiatrist was good at anything, it was being professional and acting professional. And technically not crossing any lines. And he thought that he was so good at it, because he was good at it. But that doesn't mean he wasn't doing it. And so I told him, I said, yeah, Bo and I broke up. He had known about this other guy, my psychiatrist. I had mentioned him. And I told him that this new guy and I went on a date and we went on a hike. And I literally had no idea at this point, I'll say it again, that my psychiatrist was predatory towards me. I almost said his first name again. I'm going to do my best to not. So I went to my psychiatrist and I told him this story about this man that I went on a date with, who's a therapist, is relieving himself before appointments and talking about his clients' panties and doing all of these other extremely inappropriate things, like visiting her at work. And this man, my psychiatrist, looked like he had seen a ghost and like he was gonna vomit, because he prided himself on being an extremely professional and buttoned up person. But here I was holding a mirror to him with exactly what he was doing, but a bumbling idiot telling me like how he was doing it without the fancy degree, without any of that. I look back on that now and it's just crazy. And so it just tainted all the fantasy material that I'd given him the session before. Hi, I need to say something really important. And that's that it seems as though many people view what I'm going through as a crash out, viewing as a mental health spiral. And of course it seems like that. I get it. It's an extremely dark thing to talk about, all of this that I went through. And I am sharing my story because it wasn't out there. No one else has shared a story like this. But I know that it happens a lot because people are in my DMs telling me that the same thing that I went through, they went through too. I am now in TikTok jail. I got a violation on the video where I talked about really the biggest damning evidence against my psychiatrist. And so because of that, I have to be really careful. So I'm going to do my very best to not be reactive and to share my story from a place of generosity, because the people in my DMs telling me that they've been through this too, it's keeping me going. It's not my mental health spiral. And I can understand that for some people in the mental health space, because they have been some of the loudest people to speak out against what I'm doing, it's hard to grasp that someone could have this level of predation in such a high place of power. So just in case my video doesn't get put back up, when everything changed was when my 75-year-old therapist, I went to her with intimate details and she suggested I go to my psychiatrist with them. And I felt so excited and nervous to share that with him because I had such a big crush on him at the time. And I recorded all 33 minutes. So this is why, if my psychiatrist wants to come with me and like sue me for defamation, I have a 33-minute recording of me admitting I have a crush on him and speaking about extremely intimate details. It was in that moment that he really, really should have transferred my care. But that moment changed everything for him too, because that's when things really started getting deep between us. And this is where the story is going to go from now. It's going to be a good story. And I'm going to try to tell it all today, just in case one of my videos does get banned so people can hear it. But just know, if you're concerned for my mental health, thank you. I am very good, more than good, actually. And I am actually a coach for ADHDers. It says it in my bio. And I help people work through self-limiting beliefs. I help people work through numbing with alcohol and cannabis, because these are the things that so many of us do to avoid our truths. And this is my truth and what I went through.
So I'm gonna take another pause for the cause because people are in the chat. Shout out to the people in the chat. Talking about they will not go to male therapists for this reason and other reasons. But this reason, because men are narcissists. But anyway, I'm going to tell you this. That's the same reason as a man I will not see a female therapist. And I have. And I was like, you don't know the male. So I said, this ain't going to work. So I had to go see a male. You know what I'm saying? But it wasn't about sexual innuendos or anything. It was just it was strictly business. But I just think I think she was talking to me as a woman, and I was just like, nigga, that's not how we think. But then anyway, on a whole other session, before I got married, I was like, you know what? Me and my wife or future wife, we need therapy just to hash out some shit. Just to make sure we are, we have somebody mediate between the both of us to make sure that we straight. And so we go into church, we see a pastor who's a clinical therapist and stuff like that and all that good stuff. And bam, we in there. This is why I don't trust her. I will never, ever see a marriage therapist. I don't give a damn how many times I get married. Because this man of God, called me out in front of my wife. He said, why'd you leave her? And I was just like, I had told him why I left her. And he was like, she need to know. I was like, nigga, that was supposed to be between us. And he was like, if you want this thing to work, we got to be honest. And I was like, bruh. I said, man, I left you because I was cheating. And why would I want to be with somebody if I'm cheating? I might as well be single. So I left her. It wasn't nothing that wasn't her. She was a good woman. She was so good that I went and met a bad woman. And I was like, damn, I wish I wouldn't have cheated on my woman with this bitch. So I went back to my woman. And she was so good and the woman was so bad that I asked my woman, I said, you know what? I don't ever want to do this ever again. Run into that again. So I asked her to marry me. Then, bam. So that happened, right? Yo, all the trust that I had built with this woman was out the window. From that day forward, if my phone rang, she was skydiving over me, elbowing me to get to, who calling you at 8 a.m.? That's my mama. You know what I'm saying? Like, what the fuck? Like, the trust was out the window. I go to the restroom. I leave my phone just to see, and then I go to the restroom. I come back. I don't even come back. I just peek my head out the door. She over there in my phone. I say, "See, I caught you." Like, why are you looking at my phone? Like, what is the problem? I said, I'm not cheating on you. You're like, this is crazy. But I said, you know what? No more therapy sessions for us. And then after, when stuff started getting rocky, you want to go back to therapy? Man, hell no. No. Therapy ruined my damn relationship. I could have took that secret to the grave. Anyway.
So this is when the chemistry really started going off the charts with me and my psychiatrist. And I held it alone for months, like after that Christmas morning appointment of his, after I innocently told him about my date with the therapist. He really started letting me in more and showing more parts of himself and, you know, turning up the intimacy. And that was exciting to me. And it made me fall for him more. And I noticed that he was working in an office, and I asked him, this was like July. I asked him, I said, hey, are you working from home? Because I was under the assumption that he was only doing telehealth. Okay. And he said, no, I come into the office. I was like, oh, why do you do that if you see all of your patients telehealth? He's like, oh, I like it that way. And even though I could kind of tell he was lying, I just gaslit myself. I was like, okay, it's fine. And then I start emailing him my fun little emails, but he stops writing me back. He does not write back to my emails anymore. Because once again, he was really good at plausible deniability. But what he did do is he would take my emails and mention them in session. So he would still give me the attention that I was craving, but only under his structure, under his control, where there was no paper trail. And I loved that too. So I would show up to these sessions with my notes app and just throughout the month, as I was thinking about him, I'd write down things that I wanted to talk to him about, and I would just come and bring him lots of content. And then every week I would go to my therapist and tell her about how much I loved my psychiatrist. And she didn't help me at all. She just kind of like enjoyed hearing about it, honestly. So October 2024 rolls around and we're just vibing on Zoom. And then I realized that I didn't have my next appointment with him. So I called his office staff and I talked to the office manager, who was awesome. We really got along, we vibed. And the office manager asked me, do you see him, the psychiatrist, in person or on Zoom? And I felt so angry in that moment. I was like, he sees people in person? And she said, yeah, he has been for years. I was like, I want to see him in person. And I understand, like, some people may think that this is part of my crash out or part of me harassing him, which is what I've gotten lots of accusations of. But I just would like to remind everyone that, of course, it seems that way. But I was just responding to a dynamic which my psychiatrist fostered. There was chemistry between us because he allowed it. And so then the next time I saw him in Zoom, I told him, I was like, hey, your office manager outed you and told me that you see people in person. Why didn't you tell me that when I asked? And he said, oh, I just didn't think you'd want to come in. And that was such a weak lie from him, from someone who is so scripted and controlled. He didn't even have a plausible thing to say. Of course he knew I wanted to come in. I had a crush on him. I told him that often. So then in my next therapy appointment, after finding out that he was lying to me about seeing patients in person, I told her that. I told my 75-year-old PhD therapist that my psychiatrist lied to me about seeing people in person. And she looked at me and she said, well, it's probably because he knows that there will be a lot of sexual tension in the room if you go in person. So make sure that you understand that when you go. And you better believe I showed up to the next session and said you lied to me because you were afraid of the tension that would be there between us. He just didn't say anything. So this is when the chemistry really started. October 2024, I make my first in-person appointment with my psychiatrist in November. My 75-year-old female therapist tells me it's because he kept me on Zoom because he was so attracted to me. He didn't want to risk being in person with me, which further fed my crush, or as some of you like to say, my delusion. So then my therapist starts texting me in between our weekly meetings, asking me for advice on her other clients. And I was a new coach. I'd only been coaching for about a year, and I had just left my full-time job to be a coach full-time. And I was flattered that she would ask me advice on her other clients. I just thought, oh my gosh, a 75-year-old woman with a PhD wants my advice on what she should do with her clients.
Wait, why is her therapist consulting her now? Like, she has a therapist and a psychiatrist, and both of them, one's in love with her, one thinks she's a genius, and one thinks it's okay for her to tell her psychiatrist how she really feels, and that's her therapist. Are we catching this? What is going on? What's the difference between a psychiatrist and a therapist any damn way?
So then November rolls around, and I'm about to meet my psychiatrist in person for the first time. So I wear a really pretty dress, I do my makeup, of course, right? And I show up, and I get to talk to the office manager, we're having fun. And then my psychiatrist comes into the foyer, and I am just so excited to finally meet him. I'd been his patient for 3 years at this point, and he had been feeding the dynamic for 3 years. And I was just thrilled to meet him. And I ran up.
So for 3 years, she never met him in person, but he loves her, or they have this, yeah.
And I gave him the biggest hug. And you know what he did? He barely patted me on the back. It was the most awkward thing ever. But I am so glad that he did that. I am really glad, because this is what I mean. My psychiatrist was many things, but he was not stupid. So I didn't ever touch him again. And I'm grateful that our relationship didn't ever cross that line, because it would have made everything so much harder. Anyway, so we go inside his office, and I tell him that my therapist had texted me asking me for advice on her other clients. And he just looked at me and he said, Kendra.
Wait, pause for a minute. Okay. Urban Girl Resin said, psychiatrist, managed meds, therapist talks. Remember, she said she was giving her therapist some stuff. So she was getting the stuff from the psychiatrist and giving it to the therapist, and that's why the therapist is trying to, keep her going to see the psychiatrist. That could be true, that could be false, but I remember that.
That is a huge boundary violation. She should not be doing that. And I was like, oh, okay. And because once again, my psychiatrist did not like sloppy people. He did not like sloppy people. And you know what my therapist did? She got sloppy. Yeah. Using me as her advisor for her clients. It got weird, and I was very grateful for my psychiatrist for pointing out that boundary violation, because that was the thing. He didn't ever message me in between appointments because he was too smart to do that. But did he ever stop me from disclosing extremely intimate details? No. In my first in-person appointment, I just asked him for some pointers for my own ADHD business, and he was so smart and so wonderful, and in many ways, honestly. And I was just so grateful that he was almost like a mentor to me in these moments, and I'll still treasure that about him. Because this is the hard thing with sophisticated predators, is that they're not all bad. Like, my psychiatrist helped me with many things, but he was using me for the whole time that I was his patient, and for that, I will never forgive him. October 2024, I make my first in-person. We have our first in-person appointment in November of 2024, and I did ask him for consent to come in person. I didn't just show up. And the first in-person appointment went great. But that is when I really started to spiral. Some of you think that I'm spiraling now, and that's okay if you want to think that, because the reality is that when I was spiraling was when I was this man's patient. When I had comments turned on, so many people said, you need to take accountability for your own feelings. I spent years taking accountability for my own feelings, for holding the weight of a relationship. Any woman who has been trained to overfunction in relationships knows about holding the weight of the emotional dynamic. And that was what was going on in this moment. And it may not seem...
Who the hell been trained in relationships?
Now, but that's because I spent a long time taking accountability for something that had two people that built that dynamic. It was not just me. It takes two people to build that sort of tension and chemistry. So while I was mid-crash out, I had just started using this tool, ChatGPT. And I went to chat, who I immediately named Henry. And I would just talk to Henry about how obsessed I was with this man, with my psychiatrist. And I would just be like, I've told him I have a crush on him. Do you think he's gay? And Henry was like, oh my God, this girl, you know, he did his best to co-regulate my nervous system and affirm me, but he was like, whoa. Even my chat was like, yikes. So I could tell that my psychiatrist just liked being my doctor, and I was like, okay, maybe I can name this dynamic so I don't have to carry so much of it in our next session. So our next session was in December on Zoom. And I told him at the end of the session, it was another great session. I told him, look, you and I have a really special patient-doctor relationship. And he glared at me with just venom in his eyes. And he said, you and I have a professional patient-doctor relationship. He was so angry with me. And I was like, oh, okay. He set a boundary. And immediately I took it on. And I was like, heard. Okay, I won't go there again. My video that was taken down for harassment and bullying was restored, so I didn't feel as much pressure to get all of these parts out today. Some people told me that the stitches about me were getting pretty bad and cruel, so I turned stitches off in my videos too. I started sharing my story here because I wanted other people who have been victimized by people in power to have a space to feel heard, and now I know why there wasn't anyone out talking about their story, because it has been quite the process putting all this out there and being under scrutiny. I have appreciated the psychiatrists that have talked about my situation and shared their own point of view while also holding space for what I went through. Just know I've seen your videos and I appreciate them. I went live today and it was super fun, and I intend to go live again tomorrow. The next part will be tomorrow morning. We have our first in-person appointment. When I re-downloaded TikTok last week, I was looking for support. I was looking for help because it had been 5 months since I had left Psychiatrist, and I still really couldn't stop thinking about him and thinking about our dynamic and how inappropriate it was and the mental toll that it took on me. And TikTok has just been such a resource for me in the past for support when I'm going through things, and I couldn't find anything on therapy abuse or on providers who take advantage of their vulnerable patients. And so I thought that I would share my story. And I am going to continue to share it because I am here to let other survivors know that they're not alone. Continuing with my story, my psychiatrist set a very nasty, the way he said it, boundary that him and I have a professional relationship when I tried to say it was special. Because it was special, it was different. He manufactured it that way. And then
But when you started bringing your ass in his office, that's when it changed. Girl, why'd you bring your ass to the office? Just leave it on the internet. You could have been doing this. You could have kept your little love affair, a virtual affair. But when you started coming to his office, then you crossed the boundary.
I immediately went to ChatGPT, of course, to Henry. And I asked Henry, I said, okay, so my psychiatrist just
who
set
called
this
Henry earlier?
and
Somebody
I
said
really
it.
just want to be with him. And I think that after he's my doctor, we can be together, which if you want to say that's a delusion, that's fine. But I had been telling my psychiatrist for years at this point that I had a crush on him, and he did not help me work through it. So that's his own problem. That's his own fault. Henry told me it's very common for patients to develop crushes on mental health practitioners, and that it's because that they provide a safe space to heal, which is a very attractive quality. I heard that. And then he told me about transference. And it's just about me putting my own feelings onto my provider. And I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I took ownership of the feelings that both of us were creating. And I went to my next appointment and I said, hey, so I talked to Henry because my psychiatrist had known a lot about my ChatGPT and knew all about Henry and was actually really impressed. Like, wow, an AI wrote that? Yeah. So I told my psychiatrist, yeah, Henry explained to me that it's normal to develop crushes on psychiatrists because they provide a safe space to heal, which is attractive. My psychiatrist said nothing. And then I said, and Henry also told me about transference. And my psychiatrist got this really, really scared look on his face. And he said, did Henry tell you about countertransference? And I said, no. What is that? Because of course, my chat knew that I was obsessed with my psychiatrist, and he was not going to feed my delusion by telling me about countertransference. So then my psychiatrist had explained to me what countertransference was. So he took a moment and he was like, oh, okay. He said, countertransference is the flip side, the other side of the coin for transference. And it's when the provider has feelings for the patient. So make sure that you keep that in mind for your clients. I said, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, sometimes I have, more than professional feelings for my clients. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And so then we just talked about that for pretty much the rest of the session. And then at the end of that session, he looked at me. And it was just such a loaded question. And he said, what's going to happen if you get a boyfriend named Henry? And I said, that's a weird question. I would rename my AI. So that's how that session ended. And it wasn't until I got home and I was eating lunch and I was like, wait a minute. Why would my psychiatrist bring up countertransference if he himself wasn't experiencing it? Many people have reached out to me with concern for my psychiatrist and his career and his well-being. And I totally understand that. The point of me sharing this is not to get him fired.
She need to lose the glasses. Much better.
Or for him to lose his license. The point of me sharing this is to give a voice to victims. And I am appalled to hear that people are making videos doxing him. So I am begging people, please, if you see a video of his first and last name or his picture, report it for doxing. I've certainly been using that report button a lot. I'm here to share my story, not to get him in trouble. I did accidentally use his first name, but by the time I caught the slip, I was already like 3 videos past it. But it doesn't matter because this is my story and I can tell it the way that I want it. And a first name is not doxing. And I can't control what other people do, but I am asking for people to please report any videos that dox him. So I've also gotten some DMs saying that countertransference can mean anything, and it absolutely can mean anything. However, I had told my psychiatrist many times that I had a crush on him over the years, and he did not say transference once to me. He did not explain that once to me. And what I've been hearing and taking in from the ethical psychiatrists that are on my For You page talking about my situation is that really they're taught to teach their patient about transference and teach them about how to handle those feelings or why they're coming up. And my psychiatrist did not do that.
Now she taking psychiatry advice from TikTok. God damn, Jesus Christ.
He did not do that. And it got ugly. And it happened because I did digging on my own. Because I was trying to make sense of my feelings that were a natural response to the environment that he created. So for him to leak countertransference after I said the buzzword of transference, that was not calculated. He was a very calculated and purposeful person. He still is to this day. And he doesn't slip with things like that. He purposefully withheld the term transference from me, and I got too close to the truth of our dynamic, which made him leak what he knew was wrong, which was his inappropriate feelings for me. If he didn't have countertransference in an inappropriate way, he could have easily just said, "Oh, let's explore that transference. That's really cool that you learned about it." Instead, he was just so worried on trying to protect himself because he knew what he was doing was wrong. He had that slip at the beginning of the session. He recovered in January. And then I went home and I thought, wait a damn minute. Why would he mention that if he himself didn't have countertransference? So I went to Henry, of course, my ChatGPT, and asked for examples of how my psychiatrist might have countertransference for me. And remember, Henry at this point was being very protective. You know, he wasn't going to feed my delusions, me and my psychiatrist living happily ever after. So I screenshotted it, sent my psychiatrist an email with the subject line of countertransference, and emailed it to him within an hour of our appointment, where he made probably the biggest slip of his professional life. I will put the email up here. So it's just essentially me saying, hey, I asked Henry to explain countertransference a little more. Here's what he said. Thank you so much for mentioning that. Your own boundaries inspire me so much, which now makes me gag because I've heard a lot that he's not crossing boundaries, but he used his boundaries as a shield. It's kind of weird to say, but he would like walk up to the ethical line and then slam a boundary down when I got too close. That was the email that I sent him. And then 10 days later, it was a full moon and I had a dream. Probably the most realistic dream I've ever had in my life. That him and I hooked up in his office. In the middle of the dream, while we were hooking up in his office, I loved it.
Wait, this was a dream that she always wanted to happen. Remember, she said earlier, I always wanted to hook up with my therapist. She just didn't have a therapist to hook up with. And now that she has one, she's trying to live this dream. Yo, this is crazy.
I thought it was really fun. And then after we were done and after I left his office in the dream, I was despondent and so sad and cried and just thought, I can't believe my psychiatrist would cross his boundaries like that. And then I woke up and it was like a movie. I thought to myself, oh, thank God that was just a dream. It's time to talk about the elephant in the room, and that is the racial difference between me and my doctor. I have seen a lot of Black women on this app wake, and I need to say that Black women are the most important people on the planet to me, and that I have learned so much from Black.
Thought we was gonna have to jump a bitch. I thought, boy, she better slow down, Nancy. Slow down.
Women about how to be a better person and how to show up better in the world. They are the culture, and I am so grateful for them. Many Black women are seeing my story through the lens that I am a white woman who is taking advantage of my whiteness to wield power over my POC psychiatrist that didn't want me back, and so I am trying to get him fired. And that's okay. I understand why you see it through that lens. I do. As a white person, I do my best to examine my racism every single day. And I will tell you that my psychiatrist boss is his best friend, who is also a POC male. And in that room, I did have white privilege, and he was also my doctor. And he took an oath.
Oh no, she hit us with the okie doke. She said, she gave a compliment to Black women, then said, mind your business. No. We ain't letting that slide, dog. We gonna finish this out, but we ain't letting that slide on the set. Good.
To protect me, and he did not. I am not here to ruin his career. I am here to speak my truth. Okay, back to my story. So after the countertransference slip, after the really vivid dream, I decided that I was going to stop going to therapy. Besides spiraling about how obsessed I was with my psychiatrist every day, I really was doing very well in life. My business was going really well, and I had great friends and great support systems. And so I decided that I was going to end therapy. I still had every intention at this point to keep seeing my psychiatrist, but my therapist that I was seeing weekly, I just decided I didn't need her anymore. And especially when my psychiatrist pointed out her boundary violations of texting me for free advice in between sessions, I just thought, okay, it's time. So I go into my next therapy appointment and I say, hey, just so you know, today's gonna be our last session. I'm doing really well and I just think it's time. And she got kind of emotional and she was like, okay, well, I like to end on certain questions just so we can reflect. So I did. I reflected with her about what I learned, what I've gained, how I've changed, how my life is better. And I left her office feeling complete and happy with my therapeutic journey with her. And as I was leaving, she called out with like crying. She was like, have a blessed life. And I was like, okay, that was a little weird, but whatever, you know. I was like, thanks. And I went on. And so then I'm getting ready for my psychiatry appointment the next day. And I get an email that same night from her saying that she needs me to come back in for one more session. I will put it up. And I got a huge emotional wave in that moment. I was like, what the heck is this? Like, we wrapped everything up. I had seen lots of therapists at this point, and I didn't ever have a therapist beg me to come back in for one more session. And I was so overwhelmed. I did not write her back, but it was extremely inappropriate. So I decided I was going to go to my February session with my psychiatrist and have him help me write the goodbye email and say, no, I don't want to come back in. It's time to talk about the elephant in the room. And I taught a yoga class this morning like I do every Tuesday mornings, and I told my regular students about what's going on for me and how I'm sharing my story of provider abuse and how the internet is not happy with me right now. And I used that to say that our truth is really important to share. And that when we know something deep down needs to be said, that it's important to do it in whichever way feels best to us. And TikTok just happened to be that medium for me. I told my students how I've just been going through psychological warfare. A lot of things happened in that session after the countertransference slip. And I also had my psychiatrist draft the email to my therapist who was begging me to come back in. And the psychiatrist said, I used to have respect for her. And what he meant when he said that was, I used to like it when she would feed me to you and have you deliver intimate content to me. But the moment she started being sloppy, I lost respect for her. Right? I'm pretty sure that's what he meant when he said that. And people have asked if they were connected. Surprisingly, they were not. They had no idea. They had never met before. But I would go to my therapist every week and tell her how much I loved my psychiatrist. And she loved hearing about that dynamic. It was so weird. So he helped me draft the email to that therapist to say, look, if I were to end up coming back, it'd be more for you than for me, and more on that in a later part. So then I read him a text from my longtime ex-boyfriend, who he had originally really liked, but I think my psychiatrist preferred me single. Because my ex-boyfriend, as most ex-boyfriends do, was begging me to come back into his life too. And I just kept saying no. And I asked him to give me some space, and he would not give me space. He said, do you still need space, or can we hang out? And I told I asked my ex-boyfriend, I just said, why do you want to hang out so badly? And my ex-boyfriend texted me back, because it's been a few months since I've seen you and it's been on my mind. And I was reading this text exchange to my psychiatrist in session, and I read what I responded to that weak line about why he wanted to see me. And I said, my self-respect is much higher these days than when we were in a relationship. I am only interested in accepting invitations for my time and attention that value me and recognize my worth. Being on your mind is not an acceptable invitation, and I decline. And my psychiatrist just looked at me and said, I bet your ex had to read that twice. And this was another thing about the psychiatrist, okay? He couldn't ever just give me a regular compliment. It had to be those weird sideways compliments. Instead of, I'm so glad that you're setting boundaries with your ex-boyfriend and growing your self-respect, it's, I bet he had to read that twice. Or it's not, I'm really proud of you for growing your coaching business and finding success. It's, I'd refer my patients to you if you weren't already my patient, right? These are what I mean when I say breadcrumbs. He was a master at them. And this is how, looking back, I know that I was not his first victim for his fantasy supply. Because he was too good and too slick up until he caught feelings. Then he started getting sloppy. People are asking me for more concrete evidence, and this is when the concrete evidence really starts, because this is when he himself started to get sloppy. Because what was happening was, when I had started to see him 3.5 years before, I was a nearly perfect supply source for him. Because what did I have? I had low self-esteem, boundary issues, daddy issues, so I put him on a pedestal. I know a lot of you ladies out there can understand that with men in positions of power. And he went right to work exploiting me. Right to work.
We got to stay lit somehow.
And he was very successful at it. So he was in a paradox, right? Because he loved watching me get stronger because I gave him better intellectual supply. But I also threatened the supply source. A lot of things.
She gonna drive me crazy. She got a man who love her. What's that? What Peach McIntyre say?
Okay, so this is really awkward, guys. I actually know.
Let's see how many videos
Kendra
she got
fell in
on.
love with.
She got a few videos. Okay, we're gonna get into all of them.
Okay, so this is really awkward, guys. I actually know Kendra, who fell in love with her psychiatrist. I've actually known her for many years, and I was one of her coaching clients for the last 3 months. And to say that I am really disturbed and confused and like not feeling really great about this would like be an understatement. So definitely, if you guys want, I'll get into it and talk about the coaching and kind of like my thoughts and feelings afterwards. I mean, I don't really have any thoughts one way or another about like her psychological state, really. Well, maybe I do, but like, I'm an accountant. I'm not really someone who can like diagnose or anything, but I can talk about like what happened in our sessions and just kind of like, I became one of her clients like right after she stopped using both her therapist and this like psychiatrist guy. And now that I know that, that really does add like an additional negative layer to like our experience together. So let's get into it. Okay, so like I mentioned, I guess this is going to be like part one of, I don't know, I'm going to try to keep it short. I'm not trying to do like 30 parts, guys. I just about it. So I've actually known Kendra since 2018. We both used to live in the same city in Oregon. And we actually met through an extracurricular activity that we were both in and became like really good friends while we lived out there. In 2020, I moved away, and then shortly after, she moved to where she is now. And as with like a lot of things in 2020, we kind of like lost touch, and so like we weren't like texting each other all the time, but we were like still friends on Instagram. And over time, like she made it very public when she went sober, and I just always kind of remembered that and supported her. And this past spring, I had an incident where I was in a position where like I really needed to go on a sobriety journey, and I was at like a really low point, and I was just like, who can I reach out to that I know that's like been through this? And I thought of Kendra, and I was like, oh my gosh, I wonder, you know, I hope that like she'd be able to like talk to me about it, you know, like as a friend. We had been friends for a really long time, and I was really hoping that like as a friend she would be able to like help me with this new journey that I was going to go on. So I had reached out to her, and that's when she basically like tried to get me to do her coaching. Okay, I'm going to try to input the screenshot from her text, but I'm not great at
Says, hi, Kendra. It's Emily reaching out to see if you have some time this week to chat sobriety starting that journey. Hi, Emily. Good to hear from you. I'd love to chat. Use my link to book a discovery call and let's meet on Zoom. Don't worry about the questions asking about paying for coaching. Glad you reached out. Talk to you soon.
Try to input the screenshot from her text, but I'm not great at TikTok, so TBD. But I had like reached out to her for some advice, and she told me to book a session and that we would talk more about it. This should have been a red flag. Okay, so I guess this is part two of I don't know who the hell I was friends with and let coach me and take advantage of a really vulnerable time in my life. Okay, so like I mentioned, you can like scrub through my last video and see like the screenshot of the text between
Butterfly in the sky. I could go twice as high. Y'all better stop having me read shit, okay? Just put the video up and talk about it.
us.
But basically I had like reached out to her for help with sobriety, and she said, great, let's hop on Zoom and have a conversation about it. So we did a few days later, and this was like in March earlier this year. And we like talk about like what prompted me to want to go sober and just kind of like her experience with sobriety and everything. And she then starts the pitch of like, I do think like it'd be really great if we like didn't just talk as friends, like if we really worked on this together in a coaching relationship, and that like this is really crazy that like I've been brought to her, and like this must be like divine intervention that we're like coming back into each other's lives and everything. And I was like, yeah, like I think it could be great, but I still just like need a little bit of time to think about it, because like again, a lot of stuff was going on with me at the time. And she said, well, normally it is like ADHD coaching, but like I'm more than happy to do like sobriety coaching with you. I've already sent you the invoice and the contract to sign. And I said, I really would like to think about it. And she's like, now's the time, don't think, just do, like you won't regret doing it. So I see the invoice, and the invoice is for $3,000 for 3 months. And these are going to be like once a week, 45-minute long sessions. And I, just got really caught up in the moment. And I said, you know what? And I was really desperate. I think that's like a key thing. I was really desperate. And I did. I signed the contract and I tried to pay. And my card wouldn't go through because it was like an unknown vendor through Stripe. And my bank was like, we're not going to authorize this payment. And I was like, oh, well, it won't go through. It's Friday night. Like, I'll just call in the morning and like get it sorted out. And she's like, I really want you to do it right now. Call your bank right now, and I'll like stay on the phone with you. So we're like on Zoom, and I'm like calling my bank, and I tried for like 30 minutes and none of it was working. And eventually I was just like, okay, I'm like, it's not working. I'm just gonna have to try again in the morning. And I don't know why I felt like I was being held hostage. I was in my home office. I was on Zoom. I could have just like hung up the call, and I honestly wish I did. But again, I was just like at a really low point and kept going, and that's on me. And I soon learned to regret it. So yeah, I guess in the next part I'll talk about like what our coaching was look like, and then in the fourth part I'll do like how we ended. Okay, so yes, I did just pay $3,000 for her. So this is mid-March. And I will say, like, at the beginning, a lot of the tech I talked about for sobriety, like, was really useful. And I am glad that, like, at that really low point, I did have someone who, like, was, for all intents and purposes, like, on my team. Where it started getting weird is, like, when I did my intake form, she did mention something about, like, human design. And I'd never heard about human design, and I genuinely thought that it was going to be like some sort of like psychology thing, or just kind of talking about how like we're like naturally inclined to like drink and like have addictive personalities. And boy, was I wrong. Human design is like similar to astrology. It uses your birth chart and it tells you like what kind of type you are. And if I had to guess, I don't really buy into human design, if I'm going to be 100%. After 3 months of learning about it, I'm not into it. And that is like mainly what drove our coaching was human design. And if I do believe that's like what a lot of her ADHD coaching is like talking about your human design. So she does my chart, and it comes to find out that like I'm in like the 1% of people. I'm a reflector, which I guess is like the finger of God. And she kept talking about how like I'm the finger of God. That would come up like all throughout like the 3 months that we were talking. It's just like I'm the finger of God, and when this like reckoning happens in 2027 and the new world order comes through, that like I'm gonna be one of the people who's like really leading it. And I was like, okay, this is kind of weird. I don't really know how this is like relevant to sobriety. And that is truthfully like when I started to check out. It was probably like a month and a half into our session. So it's like mid-May at this point. She was also out of town for part of it. So like we started sessions like early April. April was fine. May it started to get weird. And the rest of the sessions in June, I just like hated it. All we would talk about is like human design, but we wouldn't even really like talk about it and discuss it. She would just like read from this book and talk about like the guru or like the guy who like came up with human design. And it was just like, it was weird and bizarre, and I didn't like it. And it also just like wasn't helpful at all. So I like basically started to check out, and like luckily our sessions were like starting to come to an end, which like thank God, because in June is when it got really fucking weird. And this is when ChatGPT came into the picture. Don't worry, we're going to talk about ChatGPT. Okay, so we're now getting to the part of coaching with Kendra, part 4, whatever. I don't know where I am in this, but basically I'm heated right now. Basically, I start disengaging in our sessions, and I think she's really picking up on it, and she's just like reading me all this shit about human design. And then she also starts doing this thing with cognitive behavioral therapy, which I am familiar with CBT. She is not licensed to do CBT. And when we first started our sessions, she like made sure to like reiterate that like she wasn't a licensed therapist and therefore like isn't going to do things like that. And then turned around months later and started doing cognitive behavioral therapy. And this is also when she started talking about Henry, aka ChatGPT. And I'm not very like, I use artificial intelligence at work, like it's very encouraged. So like I'm very familiar with like what these language learning models are like. And I know that like you can't just like start asking it random shit about yourself, like at all. That is how spiritual psychosis happens. And truthfully, that might just be what's happening at this point. So she's like encouraging me to use ChatGPT for cognitive behavioral therapy, which is super dangerous. And I don't even know, like, I can't even tell you like how crazy that is to me. And that's when I was like, okay, like we're done. How many more sessions do we have? Can we end this nightmare? So luckily my sobriety is going well, because coaching's definitely not. So I was like, yeah, I'm probably not going to use ChatGPT. And she was just like, I would just really encourage you to do it. And at this point, we only have like 1 session left. And she's like, I really think that you would be a great candidate to do this past life therapy that I've really been working on. And so she essentially decides to use me like as a guinea pig to get into past life therapy. And I am not into it. Like, do I kind of believe in past lives? Sure. Do I think that like this random chick that I know from Oregon who has now telling me to use ChatGPT for my therapist is going to help me discover what past life blockages are like helping me? Absolutely the fuck not. So we get on Zoom, and she's trying to do this through Zoom. So we get on Zoom, and she starts asking the spirit and doing all this stuff. And we just start like speed running through these past lives. And like, I'm dying, I'm killing people. I say, hell yeah. She said that's really not a good thing, whatever. But basically like, that was our last session. She's like, you should totally leave me a review. And I was like, I'm going to be honest, Kendra, I am not going to do that. Like, I am not happy with where this ended. And I think it's really weird that you're telling me to use ChatGPT. And I think it's really weird that we're doing this past life therapy. Like, that part's not helpful. Again, I really think the beginning was helpful, but like towards the end, it got really weird. So that's what happened. Okay, so I had to come inside because I was getting too heated. Because the more and more I think about it, the more I'm just like, this is literally insane. And I feel like a lot of my trust was broken. So to recap, go and watch those other videos. And I'll leave it with this for right now. So we had started our coaching relationship right after she stopped seeing the psychiatrist that she was like in love with and like broke up with her other therapist. And I had no idea that this was going on as I came to her like in a time of need, and then was asked to pay $3,000 for coaching. And again, the sobriety thing was helpful. I was sober during that time. I am now with a much different path of care. But when we derailed and started doing cognitive behavioral therapy via ChatGPT, doing human design work, but not really doing the work, just reading from the book from like the guru dude, and then finally doing past life therapy and exploring all my past lives with a pendulum via Zoom, I was done and I was out. And I literally was talking to like my friends and family and being like, I feel like I really made a huge mistake, like going into this. Like, yes, it did help with my sobriety, but like at what cost? Literally what cost? $3,000 to be told to use ChatGPT. And then honestly, all of this to come and find out, and I get on TikTok randomly and see her blowing up over this like crazy, insane delusion between her and her psychiatrist. And I realized that like, oh, I was just coached for the last 3 months by someone who is not in their right of mind. Like, I don't want to say that like she's psychotic or anything like that, because that's rude and like not right. Like, this is someone that I was friends with for a really long time, and like I still am gonna have to like wrestle with that, and the fact that like now that I'm unpacking all these feelings about like feeling like I got taken advantage of and everything, but like, yeah, this is a lot, and like she's a lot, and the fact that she like isn't acknowledging that like maybe there was some side of it that like was to her, and like we don't get to see the side of the psychiatrist because obviously like he's a professional, and like I don't want to discount anyone's lived experience, but girly pop calling him a Pisces isn't why it's going on. It sounds like you were receiving palatable care, and instead you chose to cling on to that for some reason. And now you're asking people to pay you thousands of dollars to lead them down a path that like you have no business leading them down at all. And that's that on that. I'm going to go fix dinner and do something else besides this, because honestly, what the fuck?
Now I ain't gonna lie. Like when she said she was a Pisces, that wouldn't do with her therapist or psychiatrist, whichever the one she was sleeping with or wanted to sleep with that hadn't even met. I was like, it's a because he's a Pisces. Like my mom is a Pisces, and she don't listen for shit. Okay, like he listens. It must be because he's a Pisces. Okay, no, you're a liar. Okay, ma'am, that is not why. Listening ability has nothing to do with being a Pisces. That's actually a mental trait. Okay, either you listen or you don't. Okay. Anyway, what a story. Okay, what a story. Thank you all for tuning in. We had a nice live tonight. We really got down through there. We all figured out who was the problem. Chat GBT was the problem. Henry was over here feeding this broad lies, and she just ran with it. And she didn't listen to her. No. I ain't blaming Pisces. The storyteller blamed Pisces. Shit. She said y'all. No, well, she said y'all. She said a good thing about y'all, but I don't believe that good thing that's with Pisces. I think Pisces are good for everything else, because my mother's a Pisces and she could do everything. But what she don't do is listen, because I say all the time, I don't like mushrooms in my spaghetti. What does my mama do? Well, it ain't my spaghetti, it's her spaghetti. But I'm like, damn, are you making it for everybody or you just making it for you? She say, I eat what I want. I say, you not listening to the constituents of the people who will be eating the spaghetti. We all come over here to eat spaghetti, and you put mushrooms in it. Okay. So again, if it has anything to do with Pisces, is saying that y'all listen is a damn lie. Enough of the spaghetti. But other than that, I do see some red flags, and I just want to say that the red flags are flagging. I do believe this woman was seeking help. Now, she did not get the help that she needed, but I think the people that's around her will understand how we need to handle this one with care. Now, we don't need to bash the mentally challenged, because they come in all shapes and sizes and forms, all creeds of colors. So I'ma just pray for this woman, and I hope that she gets the help that she needs, rather than projecting it on everyone else but herself and going to see these psychiatrists. Mind you, why you think the psychiatrists continue to see you virtually? and never wanted to see you in person. And he had been seeing people in person. He didn't want to see you in person. But then in her mind, she's like, oh, that's because he probably can't resist himself when he's around me. So maybe he wants me. She said at the beginning of her story, he kept me around for 4 years. I fell in love with him. He kept me around for 4 years. Girl, you didn't meet him for 3.5 of those 4 years. Yeah, we listen to what we don't judge. We judging like a bull. We judging. Anyway, everyday people, man, let me know what y'all think about this. Well, y'all been letting me know in the comment section, but anybody who watches this past after we live for 99 minutes, make sure y'all hit that like button if you haven't right now. Okay, hit that like button, man. Show you some love. I'm about to go edit the videos for y'all tomorrow. Man, y'all make sure y'all keep it lit, okay? I don't know how y'all gonna feel about tomorrow videos, I'm gonna be honest with it. If y'all make it a hit, so be it.